I currently work at the Canadian Red Cross. I am the Vice President of Programs, and this relates to our work in Canada, so the Canadian operations. I think in terms of this conversation, while the role has many different scopes of work, it's the work related to disaster risk reduction. It's a little bit more difficult for me to answer the question in terms of how it relates to the Red Cross specifically. If I could step back maybe a little bit. I've been at the Red Cross now for 7 years. Before that, I worked internationally. So my experience in dealing with flooding and response to flooding recovery actually started in Asia 20 years ago when I worked for the Canadian International Development Agency and then UNICEF, where we did disaster response. But in terms of the Canadian context, again, 7 years working in disaster management, which is now framed as Canadian operations, because our approach is looking beyond what we do in emergency management and really looking at how we promote risk reduction. If we look at what we're doing now, and if I can give a couple clear examples, one of the things we're working with Partners for Action, again, under University of Waterloo, so we have very close relationships with both Intact as well as Partners for Action. Partners for Action has provided us the opportunity to look at communities that have been impacted by flooding to better understand their perceptions of risk before the event and how those perceptions have changed since experiencing the event, to help us better understand what's impeding people from taking action, what's impeding people from really better understanding the risks that they may face as a homeowner or as a tenant, and then looking at what they can do within the home to mitigate that risk. Well, I think maybe the key word here is deal, because in order to deal, one way is to really just look at it's a response focus. So if it happens to me, how will I respond? But if we really want to help people deal, it's really helping them understand what they need to better prepare themselves, what they need to further research and understand before a potential event may happen. So this is where we at the Red Cross are really trying to ensure that our efforts aren't just helping individuals at the time of response or soon after, but also really looking at what can we do to help them better understand and prepare at the individual level, but then also looking at how we work with communities and neighborhoods as a whole. So to deal, it's really, take responsibility, understand the risks, and don't have, false expectations in terms of what is the coverage we have, what is the coverage we have through insurance, but also what are the expectations you have on your municipalities and other government structures to provide assistance, because in some cases people are disappointed. So it's better to be fully aware of what you've done to better prepare yourself through insurance, but also to really understand what's the landscape of support for your community. My role is a national role, and more specifically what I do is really try and look at it through the strategic lens. What is our strategy of support? What do we recognize we can do at the national level to better ensure our operations in different contexts, whether it's urban, whether it's rural, whether it's northern, that we're enabling our response teams to have the right skill sets, the right tools, the right relationships, so that when a response happens, they're able to do their job and they're able to work with the right stakeholders, because as we all know, this isn't a point of one organization, one entity. It really is a collective response from all of those that touch different places of responsibility. It depends on the context, it depends on the relationships, and so it's a great question. But depending on our relationships, formal relationships, whether it be with the municipality or with a province, we can play a role in the evacuation itself, or we can get involved in terms of that initial relief phase, recognizing as communities are impacted, where do they go for support, what's the reception center, how do they access the basic needs, whether it's related to shelter, clothing, and everything else that people need in order to be able to move through the next few days, recognizing that they're in a place where they're away from home. They don't have necessarily the same support structures. So we're able to provide assistance through the evacuation, all the way into that initial relief phase, looking at the delivery of the 6 essential emergency services. But then it moves into early recovery, and that's where, again, it depends on the relationship we have with the municipalities, the expectations of Canadians on the Red Cross, and what we can do to help people navigate return to home, help people navigate those early recovery moments, recognizing that the stress on family can be so overwhelming, especially when you're recognizing that family units can have children, they can have dependent family members. So how do we better support those family units to be able to move forward, access support, whether it be Red Cross support or other support, to help them move into longer term recovery. And even then, long-term recovery, if we look at some of the larger events for flooding, we had the flooding here in Ontario, well, every year, depending on which community, but also just across Canada. And so sometimes those long-term recovery actions take years. And it's really looking at what can we do with the funds available to support at the individual level, but also recognizing resilience involves the community as a whole. So how can we work through community partners who already have relationships with these families so that they're able to better do their jobs? Yeah, I've been able to sit on this, on the advisory group for a couple years now, and it's a wonderful opportunity to understand what's happening at the federal level, but also to work with different stakeholders, because on the advisory group you have government bodies that are represented, but you also have non-governmental organizations as well as university members. And this is a space where we support the efforts of Public Safety Canada. It is under Public Safety Canada to identify opportunities to address their commitments to the Sendai framework. So Sendai framework is really the guide for countries around the world in terms of what can we do as a country to really contribute to global efforts to address disaster risk reduction. So at this table, we're able to have the conversations to think about what disaster risk reduction means here in Canada. How do we collectively work together to promote the priorities of the government, but also recognizing that we need to bring light to our own organizational or department mandates so that there's an awareness about how the different pieces of support, whether it's at the time of response or it's in recovery, come together so that we can be more cohesive, as well as really recognizing how we keep at the center of the conversation, which is the impacted populations. Part of disaster risk reduction is to ensure that individuals and communities are better prepared. So the conversations happen throughout the year. It's just whether or not the conversation is being framed around what we are doing to support resilience building, or what are we doing now recognizing that there has been an event to ensure that as we look at that immediate planning and the long-term planning, again, we're really trying to address resilience. It's interesting that you raise this question, because this is something that's top of mind for us at the Red Cross, because we do have this tool, we have an app, and we recognize the power of the app to support alerts. So yes, should there be a flood event or the risk of a flood event, we can push out alerts coming from the weather network. But it's a point as well of recognizing that beyond the alert, how do we provide that immediate information that would help people at the time immediately before the event, but then recognizing what's the information they need to help them move through the next few days. So it's helpful information where there's tips, there's checklists. We're really trying to see how we can have it be even more interactive. And so it's a work in progress right now in terms of making it more meaningful to the different audiences, recognizing this app is on the phones of Canadians across the country, and the needs are different. So how can we provide relevant information in a way that people are able to digest it, and in the same time really create an appreciation for the importance of being prepared, being informed, and taking action. I had the pleasure of sitting in one of our preparedness workshops. We had just finished revamping the preparedness workshop, and it talks about our preparedness kit. And one of the things that I really appreciate is that we can look at a kit and we can talk about what are those essential components, having a flashlight, having your key contact information, having your personal documents, and recognizing people don't keep personal documents in the kit, but it's that list that, hey, you've put these personal documents in this place, make sure you take them with you. So there's those things that are somewhat generic to everybody that they need to have, but it's also recognizing what needs to be in that kit is sometimes personal as well. So do you have young children? Have the children being able to provide input into what they either want to grab or what's already available in terms of their toys, their books, or whatever it may be. We also recognize, and I touched on it earlier, that family units are diverse, and so we really need to make sure that those with special needs have access to their medical record information that's important, to their doctor's contact information, prescriptions, and everything else that's going to make sure that they're going to be safe for the next few days, and that they're able to access this support once they're out. So it's having the kit, it's knowing where it is, it's checking the batteries, but at the same time making sure that you put things in there that are personal to you as well. Yeah, our personal disaster assistance program is something that we have in different municipalities, and it's formalized through agreements. So this assistance, for the most part, is actually focused on events where people have been displaced from home. And in Canada, and in the work that we've done in the agreements we have at the municipal level, this really does focus on home fires. That's not to say necessarily that we haven't provided assistance to flooding, but again, it really depends on the agreement we have in place and that assessment. It's so important for us when we're looking at providing assistance. It's having the space to do that, recognized by the local authorities, but it's also recognizing that we're not duplicating. So when we talk about flooding, sometimes there's already insurance and other support structures that come into play. So we really make sure that we do the right assessment. I think that our work over the last few years, as well as even beyond that, beyond what we do in Canada, as well as the work we've been doing with the University of Waterloo, is only highlighting that we have to make it personal. If people don't appreciate the potential risks that they face, if they don't appreciate and recognize their roles and responsibilities to take protective measures, as well as understanding what their support structures, it's hard for us to make progress. It's that conversation of either I'm not at risk, it's not going to happen, or it's happened, it's not going to happen again. And we know, I'm sure, that as we all look at the news, even over the last couple of days, over the last couple months, is that we do have to expect the unexpected. I think that's from the personal level. I think it's also important to recognize, and this is what's stressed in the Sendai framework, and this is really what the advisory group attempts to do, is to highlight that this is a whole of society, that everyone has a role and responsibility. So we need to bring the different members, the different sectors of society together to build those relationships, to have those conversations, and to identify what are the roles and responsibilities and how can we work better together, and how can we really think outside the box in terms of what could we be doing in the future to be able to respond in a more appropriate way to the different events that we face here in Canada. I think that one thing is really recognizing what capacity do they have, because there's so many simple things that they can be doing. They can be doing something as simple as moving valuable things off the floor of the basement and moving it to higher ground. They can be redirecting spouts and everything else that I'm sure that the people listening to this video know a lot more about than I do, given their role in inspection. But I think it's having that conversation. And what I really appreciate about this program is that you are enabling individuals who touch homeowners every day with the right information, with the right tools, with the right conversations. So I think that it's about empowering them to recognize that these conversations not only happen in their workplace, but can extend just in terms of their interaction with family and community around them. My parents had severe flooding, and it did lead to damage on the first floor as well as the basement. And what I think it really made them appreciate is understanding the magnitude, not only in terms of that financial damage, but the effect it has through the loss of possessions, those personal possessions, which might not have a dollar amount attached to them, but are of value to all of us and are our memories. I think that when we lose those items, it's recognizing that there's almost a grief process that you have to go through, and you have to be able to understand what's my recovery process. And from a more practical side of it as well, it was my parents really understanding how to navigate insurance, and then how to advocate for themselves and have the right conversations, and recognizing the time that all of that takes as well. So it's not as simple as you go through an event and you think you've ticked the box. I've moved stuff up, I've got insurance, I understand because I went through it, I read it. It's recognizing that it's a process, and the process, depending on many different factors, not just the magnitude of the damage, are going to somewhat determine how long that process may take. That's a good question, and I probably should have called them before I answered this one. But one thing I do know, and whether it's something that they reflect on a periodic basis, it's just making sure that they stay up to date on the insurance, that they really purchase the correct insurance. It's having them really pay attention to different weather events. I think that's something that happens, and I've seen it in different contexts where what might be something as simple as a rain but it can also be a reminder of the event and sometimes cause more stress. So those of us that have been through events, what seems like a normal weather pattern can be actually something that's considered a little bit more stressful. Not for my parents, but again, going back to the work that we've done over the years, as well as the relationships we have and the research and the findings coming out, is that yes, for many people, how they respond to different weather events will be an escalated sense of stress when it comes to when the event happens. So I don't think my parents might necessarily be a good example. They're pretty laid back, and I don't know what bothers them. But in terms of people, we have to recognize again that everybody reacts differently, and that it can cause stress in the future. They haven't. They haven't. And whether that's because they took all the right actions, whether that's because they have been a little bit lucky, but they have not. One thing I do appreciate in terms of the home flood protection program and the app and some of what I think are the key resources that you use in your course, it's one thing to understand and to deliver a message about what people can do, but it's actually trying to listen and understand from their perspective of that homeowner about potentially why they're not taking actions, and how do you make sure that the conversation is phrased in a way that they can appreciate it from that personal level. So it is a relationship, and it's not a point of going and just ticking boxes. It's a point of going and understanding to whom you are talking. I think also just recognizing that what might seem as a simple task to one person may not be a simple task to another. And so it's really trying to help them identify what they feel confident to take and do on their own. It's recognizing the limitations, whether it's financial mobility or anything else, and then coming up with alternatives and being creative in that conversation.